Welcome everybody to the final session of the Safe Street Summit 2021. We're glad to have you here. My name is Jack Gray. I'm the co-founder and global lead of the City One program at Ford, a program that looks at addressing access to equity, accessibility, safety, and sustainability through improved mobility. Really excited to have you here to talk through how do we work towards a safer, healthier, and more resilient South Florida. And my two panelists today are fantastic. They're going to be talking a little bit further about the total journey experience for communities and exploring some bold changes in policy that can move us towards a more safe and vibrant streetscape. To introduce those two, I'd like to first introduce Nadine Lee. She is the Chief of Staff for Los Angeles County Metro. In this role, Nadine drives projects, programs, and services to provide a world-class transportation system for the citizens of LA County. She previously served in the Metro's Office of Extraordinary Innovation. I love that title. And she led the development of Vision 2028, a 10-year strategic plan to improve mobility in the county. She has a particular affection for buses. And her passion is to revolutionize the status of this workhorse this workhorse mode for the benefit of everyone. So welcome, Nadine. We also have with us Chris Bruntlett, the Marketing and Communication Manager for the Dutch Cycling Embassy. The Dutch Cycling Embassy is a public-private partnership that represents the best knowledge, experience, and experts from the Netherlands. As a longtime campaigner in Vancouver, he fell in love with the Dutch bike culture in 2016, inspiring him to co-author the book, Building the Cycling City, the Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality. Chris uses his knowledge and passion to share practical lessons for global cities wishing to follow in the Dutch footsteps and become better places to live, work, and of course, cycle. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation and looking forward to everybody contributing questions to the chat. We'll be answering those a little bit later. And with that, Chris, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jack. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from here, Delft in the Netherlands, where I am located. About 5,000 miles away, but perhaps 50 years in the future, we like to think the Netherlands is a place that has built safe, healthy, and resilient streets. And hopefully I can shine a little glimpse at the end game of what that looks like and give some perspective about what your region can expect as it moves forward towards this admirable and most necessary goal. So I'll begin with my next slide, just introducing our organization. As Jack said, we're a public-private partnership between the national government here in the Netherlands and about 75 different organizations that are working in the field of cycling. They are private consultants, municipal governments, software technology companies, academic institutions, even the National Rail and public transport agencies are part of our organization. And we take teams of experts around the world to help those cities learn from the Dutch and start implementing these concepts and ideas on their own street. Next slide, please. So I'll begin today by just acknowledging the moment we're in. If you've been paying attention on social media of late, we are globally in a bit of a bike boom at the moment. That has been brought on by the global pandemic that we're seeing. Cities around the world are suddenly, very quickly adapting their streets to a new reality. The first steps in a lot of cities, like Oakland pictured there, was to start closing off streets with temporary barriers and create what they were calling slow streets, reducing the speed limit and giving people a place to exercise and move in a socially distant way to maintain their physical and mental health. And then as the first lockdown started being lifted, you saw more and more cities, Berlin is also pictured here, create really quick, light, cheap networks of pop-up bike infrastructure that was not in response to what they saw as an opportunity, but a necessity to fill the gap that was lost by their public transport systems as people abandoned the buses, trams, and trains in their cities. They had to provide a viable alternative for fear of all of those people jumping into their automobiles and making a pretty congested city potentially even worse. Next slide, please. So virtually every city, every country in the world was reacting to this pandemic. And if you saw what the Netherlands was doing, it was actually precious little. And I think to some people that may have come as a surprise. They weren't closing down streets. They weren't creating new networks of cycling infrastructure. But that's largely because those networks were already in place. 37,000 kilometers of fully segregated bike lanes here in the Netherlands. Nearly 80% of their urban streets are slowed to a speed of 30 kilometers an hour. That's 20 miles per hour or less. But it wasn't always that way. And I think this is an important point to emphasize, that it was, in fact, a reaction to a similar set of crises in the early 1970s that turned their society and their cities and their urban and transport planning in a very different direction. The first, in 1972, it came to a head, a real tangible road safety crisis that was killing over 3,000 people per year, including 400 children. And so a number of protest movements popped up, the most prominent of which was the Stop the Kindermoord, or Stop Child Murder campaign, that really pressured politicians to address that crisis on their streets. The following year, they had an oil embargo that was placed on them by the oil-producing nations in the Middle East, which meant for 6 weeks, the streets were relatively calm of cars, and actually led to the national government imposing a car-free Sunday policy because of the gasoline shortages. And the sale of bicycles doubled, and people suddenly were able to experience their streets on a completely different level. So that said about this journey that the Netherlands has been on for the past 50 years to start changing their streets to make them more human and more multimodal, if you will. The next slide, please. It wasn't all necessarily a smooth road. There were a number of high-profile failures. Demonstration routes the national government built in certain cities, 2 examples here in Tilburg and The Hague, which were ultimately deemed pretty bad failures because of the routes that were selected, because of the lack of consultation, the lack of connectivity. They weren't used. They received quite a significant backlash from business owners and the public. And they applied those lessons that they learned in designing individual routes, and realized very quickly that they had to start thinking at the network level. Next slide. So here in Delft was the project that really changed things. And this is when they first built a network of cycling infrastructure, a combination of traffic calm streets and segregated routes that was actually not one network, but 3 different networks you can see indicated on your screen. The green, the blue, and the red are all different grid sizes, but they are planned with a specific journey type, a journey length, and a journey a user in mind, in order to give people the opportunity to cycle from everywhere to virtually anywhere in the city, and addressing all of the gaps and the weak links in the system, and really looking at things in a comprehensive level. So this set of principles that we now take around the world when we're talking about network design. We urge cities that they have to think about making routes that are direct, that are safe, that are comfortable, that are cohesive, and are attractive. And in doing so, all types of different users benefit. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about who you see cycling on the streets of the Netherlands, because it may not be the usual suspects that you would normally anticipate. Next slide. So the first group is children, and I, as a parent of 2 children, we brought them to the Netherlands here at ages 10 and 12. The cycling infrastructure, the traffic calm streets are really transformational for the freedom and autonomy of children, giving them an opportunity to walk or cycle independently without adult supervision, at least at a certain age. And that's telling that teenagers are actually the group that cycles more than any other demographic group here in the Netherlands. Nearly 60% of all trips by people aged 12 to 17 choose the bicycle as their primary mode of transportation. And that has all these knock-on effects in terms of their health, their happiness, their freedom, autonomy. And they also, not coincidentally, happen to have the lowest levels of obesity and depression, at least here in the European Union. Next slide, please. Another demographic group that's often underrepresented and underserved by our transportation network is women. And we know from the statistics, they are predominantly the ones that are making the care trips in a city, supervising children oftentimes, making shorter trips, making multi-purpose trips, so church chaining throughout the city. And in many cities, we've designed optimized our transport networks for the single purpose long distance commute to work with, and ultimately ignoring these shorter multi-purpose trips. And so with these fine-grained cycling networks, it gives women predominantly an opportunity to drop the kids off at school, stop at the grocery store, and make it to the office all without literally breaking a sweat. Next slide. This is, I think, maybe a bit counterintuitive because we hear often this idea that a cycling city is perhaps ableist, that people with disabilities are unable to cycle. And that's certainly true. But I think when you build this inclusive infrastructure, these segregated spaces, it opens a whole world of possibilities for people who can suddenly use their streets. And that's born in the fact that 16% of all journeys by physically impaired people in the Netherlands are done by pedal power, often on adapted vehicles that are electrically assisted tricycles or hand cycles. But for those that can't cycle, these spaces are also used by people in wheelchairs, motorized wheelchairs or manual wheelchairs. And that comes down to the fact that the devil is really in the details. Not only are these spaces built wide, but the curbs are built at an angle, so they're quite forgiving. There's lots of curb cuts, the asphalt's quite smooth, and there's all these benefits that come with building a cycling city that also work for people with physical disabilities as well. Next slide. This is another demographic group that I think we often assume are going to be able to drive a car forever, and unfortunately that isn't the case. And that's born in this amazing statistic by the American Automobile Association that says generally senior citizens drive 10 years more than is deemed safe because they fear that losing their driver's license is a loss of being able to participate in society. And here in the Netherlands, the 65 to 75 age group actually has a higher mode share than the other adult categories. And that's only further strengthened by the embrace of the electric bicycle, allowing them to maintain physical mobility, physical ability and mobility into long into their 70s and sometimes 80s. You will see people cycling around here. Again, that's not just a mode of transport, but it's a means to participate in society, make it to the community center, an engaging social life, and it really means that it gives them access to the city that they may not otherwise have if they were trapped in their home or reliant on relatives for a means of transport. And the last group I'll talk about this afternoon are those that perhaps don't have the economic means to own and operate a motor vehicle. Last count, it was about $10,000 American dollars a year to own and operate a car in the United States. This is perhaps not a big deal for most people, but on the lower end of the economic ladder, a simple spike in gasoline prices, a car crash, an unexpected maintenance fix, and they are feeling the burden. And this combination of the bicycle and the fast, frequent public transport system here in the Netherlands works to replace the vast majority of car trips here by providing the same door-to-door convenience for any number of distances. And that's born in the fact that almost 81% of the population lives within 7.5 kilometers of a train station, and that ultimately provides them with a more equitable access to housing, employment, education, and healthcare opportunities. So that was my whirlwind tour of the Netherlands. As I said, this is not something you're going to achieve overnight. It is a long distance run. But having, as a country that's made all the mistakes for you, you can perhaps learn from the Netherlands, and maybe this journey will not take 50 years, but you could do it in 20. As Jack said, if you'd like to learn more, my book is Building the Cycling City that I co-authored with my wife, Melissa. And the Dutch Cycling Embassy is here to help. If you want a webinar, a workshop, any number of questions or inquiries, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And I like to leave people with this adapted Chinese proverb that reminds them that the hardest part of the journey is the first step, and that is that the best time to build a cycle track was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chris. Much appreciated. I'll hand it over to Nadine for her presentation from LA County Metro.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Chris. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I guess it is afternoon here too in LA at this point. Before I get started, I just want to give a shout out to my buddy, James Cromar from Broward County. I know you're out there somewhere, and even though we can't exchange pleasantries, just want to know that, or just want you to know that I'm saying hello. So I just want to start out by saying that being from Los Angeles, I mean, everybody knows something about LA, and it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse, because while everybody knows something about LA, often the first thing they think of is traffic, and that's a really difficult reputation to change. So being from LA, I hope that everyone in South Florida will appreciate the fact that if we can make streets safer and more multimodal in LA, you can too. And a quick note, most of the concepts that I'm going to talk about in this first 10 minutes or so is really, most of them are coming from Metro's Vision 2028 strategic plan, and I'll provide a link to that plan at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So before we get into talking about how to make streets safe for everyone, I really want to pull up to the 100,000-foot level and talk about the problem that we're trying to solve. A lot of times we're saying, our problem is that we need to get more people on transit or whatever, but really in LA and a lot of other urban areas, we are experiencing this phenomenon. It's not a new one, but the fact is that more people are trying to take more trips on a system that's already congested. And it's an insatiable demand for limited street space that really creates conflicts between all the users of the system. And that, of course, as you all know, results in a lot of negative externalities, such as travel delay, traffic accidents, inefficient use of energy resources, poor air quality, and of course, the worst part of it, which is the egregious disproportionate burdens to disadvantaged communities, where high quality travel options really are just virtually non-existent. So in short, we have a capacity problem, and that problem limits individual, community, and regional prosperity. It exacerbates inequity, and of course, produces all the undesirable environmental outcomes that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. The root cause of this is that we're using our system really inefficiently. We spent decades and billions of dollars prioritizing solo driving at the expense of providing high quality options for everyone. SOVs, or single occupancy vehicles, have been our primary focus, and other modes have really been regarded as a nuisance or an afterthought. And the reality is that people who are taking other modes, non-SOV modes, are really, their trips are no less important than people who are driving their personal vehicles. And so, sorry, I'm gonna check my chat because I just got a note. Oh, hi, James. Sorry about that interruption, everyone. So as I said before, we have a capacity problem. We have limited street space and a ton of demand for that street space. And I want to point out here that the commodity that we have here is space. It's not time, it's not fuel, it's not emissions, it's space. And this is the backdrop for our conversation about moving forward to create space for all users. Next slide, please. A few principles to keep in mind as we go about delivering safe, healthy, and resilient streets for everyone. We really need to focus on outcomes and not outputs, and I'll get into that here in the next slide. We want to keep equity at the forefront, really focusing on the people who are taking the non-single occupancy vehicle trips. We want to take a multimodal system approach, looking at the entire system, not just one mode. And then we want to deliver a total journey experience, which is really looking at different segments of the journey and how they may impact the way we use our streets. Next slide, please. So talking about outcomes versus outputs, in our Vision 2028 strategic plan, we declared our intent to move more people by prioritizing modes that use space more efficiently. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to strive for accessible and convenient travel at all times of the day for all people. But that means we have to change our mindset. We have to acknowledge that those who are not driving solo, and I'm talking about walkers, rollers, bus riders, even scooters, I know, they also deserve safe and dedicated spaces on our city streets. And our goal is more person trips, not vehicle trips, on our entire system. And I want to point out the comment that Chris made in his presentation about making our streets more human. And that's what we're talking about is, people throughput, not vehicle throughput. So, we have decades of proof that expanding streets and highways is not a successful long-term strategy. It makes travel more dangerous for everyone. It limits access to opportunity for our most vulnerable populations. It causes these tremendous environmental impacts. And of course, we all know it doesn't actually alleviate congestion. So it's not solely about protected bike lanes or the Wooner for the sidewalk, Wooner to be using a Dutch term, which those things are outputs. Those are the things we often tend to focus on because they're things that are a little bit more tangible. But really what we're trying to do is accommodate more people in existing space, and that will improve mobility for everyone. And we believe in LA that it will result in a better quality of life for our citizens and a more equitable and prosperous community for everyone in LA County. Next slide, please. Speaking of equitable outcomes, I want to talk a little bit about equity. And to do so, I want to focus a lot on sharing space on the street with buses. And as you heard in the intro, I mean, I'm a big bus fan. You know, whenever we talk about complete streets, you know, there's a lot of talk about bikes and scooters and pedestrians, but we forget that buses also need dedicated space on our streets. So just to give you a sense of what it's like for bus riders in LA, here's some stats. 75% of Metro's riders take the bus. 80% of them are low-income people of color. The average household income for our bus riders is $18,000 a year, which by anyone's standards is quite low. So if you can imagine the high cost of living in LA, that's pretty horrible. You know, most of these people have few mobility options, and of those options, none of them are generally very good. Right now, during COVID, we have about 500,000 people riding the bus today. That's about 50% of our pre-COVID ridership on the bus. And I also like to point out that right now during COVID, we carry more people on the bus system than we carry on our rail system in a non-COVID day. So there are a tremendous number of people riding the bus. It's an important mode in our system. And again, you know, as you might expect, these are essential workers. And despite the high cost of car ownership in Los Angeles, low-income families in LA are spending a larger proportion of their household income to have the convenience and accessibility of a car, because as I said before, the other options are just failing to meet their demands. Let's see, where am I? Oh, so I know that as we talk about changing the use of our space on our city streets, we'll all face a lot of controversy and backlash. And the people who are driving cars, you know, they will kick and scream and say how this is a really inequitable thing, it's not fair. But I want everyone to acknowledge that our transportation system as it exists today is hugely inequitable. Solo drivers have had priority of investment in street space throughout most of history. And you know, the other modes, they really fight for the scraps. So in addition, we have a massive mobility gap between those who have the means to drive and those who don't. And the system actually doesn't work well for either group. The consequences of delay or uncertainty for low-income individuals can result in job loss or loss of a home, which are much more devastating than somebody who has a delay in their car trip, who's going to their white-collar job. So it's really time to direct our attention and resources to prioritizing the non-SOV modes for the benefit of the most vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. To improve mobility in our cities and on our streets, we need to consider the entire multimodal system holistically and leverage all of their component parts to deliver high quality end-to-end trips for all users. Each mode has a role to play in delivering speed, access, efficiency, and convenience. And Chris mentioned, arranging the bike system by type, length, and journey, and taking that approach. And I think it's very similar when we talk about the various modes of our various transportation systems. And so each mode has different space requirements in order to be efficient, but they all have to share. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about the total journey experience. The system perspective that I just mentioned in the previous slide has the potential to overlook important components of the journey that also factor into safe, healthy, and resilient streets. The waiting experience at bus stops, for example, is a big part of the total journey experience, particularly for short trips on bus or trips that require transfer. Creating a comfortable and safe environment at a bus stop, including lighting, shelters, and customer information, benches, That all requires space on the street or sidewalk. Likewise, bike or scooter parking to start or end a trip can also compete for street and sidewalk space. And so I encourage all of you to look for other elements of the total journey that will require rethinking the complete street. Next slide, please. So this is a closing session of a really inspiring summit, and I think everybody's pumped, but everybody's probably like, okay, where do we start? I just want to be the first to acknowledge that it is not easy. Finding ways to reclaim street space and create safer mobility, super hard, but worth the fight. Remember what I said earlier, we want to focus on outcomes, not outputs, keeping equity at the forefront, taking a multimodal system approach, accounting for the total journey experience, understanding the needs of the users. And I want to just leave you with a few thoughts, which is just keeping in mind that you should think outside the box and challenge the status quo, because most of the things that you're going to be doing in your cities are going to be new and they're going to be scary. There's going to be a lot of risk, and there's a lot of inertia that is sort of standing in the way of making progress. But again, it's worth the fight, so you have to kind of persevere through that. It will be super helpful. I think a lot of people want to do this, but it's difficult, collaborating on the common vision. What's the outcome everybody's trying to achieve, and keep your eye on that prize. It's really important to understand that you want to maintain the principles of what you're trying to do. For example, what Chris was talking about in the Dutch experience, I think there are a lot of really great principles, but you have to customize the approach for your local context, because not everything will work exactly the same. Certainly the path or the journey that you take to implement bike lanes in your community won't be the same as what Chris has seen in the Netherlands, but you'll still get there. I think, again, keeping your eye on the prize is really important. And then lastly, make sure you try things, pilot things, demonstration projects, make mistakes, learn, improve, and eventually you're going to succeed. Chris said that it took 50 years in the Netherlands. I think we do have the potential to do this faster in the US, particularly because of COVID. We have lots of opportunities. Grab those opportunities while you can. Next slide, please. And just to provide the quote that Chris was referencing that he adapted, I think the principle here is to start somewhere. It doesn't matter where you start, just start. And so we would love to encourage all of you to just take the leap of faith and know that you're going to eventually get there. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you, Nadine. Really appreciate that. I love that last slide that you had of the principles. I was trying to scribble some down myself, challenging the status quo and maintaining the principles, but adapting to your local environment. So some great questions are coming in from the chat, and would encourage audience members to continue submitting questions. But one I think that is a great way to start is thinking about the challenges that we've experienced with COVID, and the impacts that we've had. It's noted there's less resources, potentially less staff furloughs, other urgent needs, whether that's food insecurity or health or whatever that might be. How do we accept all that and at the same time make the case for investing in walking and biking and transit and multimodal change? How do we kind of balance those two, and how do we continue to make that case for future investment? And maybe Nadine, or either one, but Nadine, hit on some of your final points too. So either one, take it away.
I think it's funny because on virtual, it looks like Chris and I are looking at each other, wondering who's going to answer the question, but we're not really. We're looking at the camera. Although on the screen, I'm looking at Chris. I think the way that I talk about the investments that we make right now, particularly given the fact that we have very limited funding available, is to think about today's riders. Who's riding the system today? Where are they? What are they taking? And how do we improve those various modes or facilities in order to create better trips for them? And of course, I am a big bus proponent. You know, in LA, we have a huge infrastructure program that continues to move forward. We have a lot of, in fact, I think we just approved an additional $700 million going into the construction program in our mid-year budget adjustment just yesterday at our 5-hour board meeting. and you know, we had $58 million that was going towards our operations by comparison. And there are a lot of color of money reasons why we couldn't have more money in our operations. But what I tell people is, you know, all of those construction projects are very important to keep going because there are a lot of jobs attached to them. But there are also a lot of jobs attached to our operations and maintenance. In our bus system and our rail system. And the people who are riding today are the ones who need us. They need us for cleaning the vehicles more often. They need us to provide enough space for distancing on the buses and the trains so that they don't feel like they have to be crammed into a vehicle. And they still need us for frequent trips and fast and reliable trips. The reliability has improved a little bit during COVID because there's less traffic, but the reality is they still need that frequency and that speed. So, so when I think about prioritizing where our resources go, I think about, okay, who's going to benefit the most with the money that I have right now? And that is today's riders.
I'll just say one thing, and it's related to what I was saying about the motivation for cities to build these pop-up networks post-COVID is they're doing this mostly because the cost of doing nothing far outweighs the cost of doing something, and creating space for walking and cycling is nothing compared to the cost that will come back to society if all those extra car journeys take place in terms of the extra congestion, the noise, air pollution, the lost physical activity. So there's a cost that will ultimately our society will pay if we continue to double down on car dependency moving forward. And right now, if we just make fairly modest investments in active travel and public transport, we can ultimately save ourselves a lot of money in the long run. Looking forward to the next crisis, because this is certainly, well, not to be all doom and gloom, but climate change is on the horizon, and we need to get more prepared in terms of resiliency in that context.
Awesome. Okay, so the next question. Thinking about how do you engage your local community members in some of the mindset shifts that it takes to move into some of these other modes of transportation. And we're seeing some people in the chat draw correlations between South Florida and the LA region, thinking about, oh, it's too hot to walk, or it's too humid, or whatever that might be to ride your bike. How do you help how do you help engage communities? How do you help work with your local residents to kind of explore new ideas around what it can mean to have a multimodal experience, and how that could impact your experience in the future?
That's a great question, because you know, we have been doing a lot of work over the last year setting up our equity office and our equity function within Metro, and we are spending a lot of time figuring out how we engage communities in this conversation about what their needs are. I think a lot of, when I think about who plans, designs, and builds the infrastructure that we have, and actually who did all the building for the infrastructure that we have today, it's largely been done by people who do not look like the people we're serving, particularly in LA. I think that's very true. And so I'm not sure really that we always know what the community needs. So when we talk about engaging them, you know, the question becomes, are we engaging them in a concept that's foreign to them because not because it's from the Netherlands, but because it's a concept that they can't grasp because maybe they don't have bikes, or maybe they don't see bikes as a reasonable way for them to get to their destination, depending on what their trips entail. So I think that, as planners and designers and politicians, policymakers, I think we really need to have very close engagement with our communities about what their needs are. I think about Enrique Peñalosa and some of the work that he was doing in Bogota, I think it's in his TED Talk, he talks about how, they formerly were spending tons of money, maintaining and building streets and communities where people didn't even own cars. And so I think it's really important for us to understand what is the mode of travel that is the most beneficial to the people in their respective communities, and then figure out how to customize our transportation network to actually serve those needs.
I think it's really interesting because you always hear from a city that their climate is not suitable for outdoor activity, whether it's walking, cycling, creating patios and terrace space. But we've seen time and time again in the Canadian prairies, the city of Calgary, Alberta, created a network of separated infrastructure in a winter city, and people kept cycling through. Here in the Netherlands, I think initially they heard that because they didn't have a Mediterranean climate that people wouldn't cycle the year round. But obviously, when you create space for people to do that activity, they will find a way to do it and just adjust their clothing. Now with the e-bike, it's removing a lot of those excuses as well. It really doesn't hold weight as far as we're concerned. Yeah, I mean, I would love the climate of Los Angeles or Miami here in the Netherlands, because it would make biking a lot more pleasant than 60-mile-per-hour headwinds and torrential rain coming off the North Sea, and people pedal through that year round.
Following on that, in Nadine, going to one of your equity points, how do you both think about new infrastructure development when working with a community, working with local residents, and they're essentially saying that's not being built for us. We've been riding bikes for 20 years and nobody's ever put in a bike lane for us, but now all of a sudden different residents are moving in and now there's bike lanes. Those lanes aren't for us. This is something that my team particularly experienced when we were working in Austin, in East Austin, and the rapid changes happening in that community. So a little bit, could you both talk a little bit more about what does it mean to lead with equity and lead with a perspective of working with the communities in that perspective?
No, I think that, as Nadine said, it's about starting a conversation, right? It's not about deciding what is the best possible solution, but engaging with the community, going to people where they live, where they work, where they recreate, where they are, and not fall into this trap of listening to the people that come out to the public hearings and tweet at their city councilors and are really engaged, because those people do not necessarily represent the community, and we certainly shouldn't let them dictate what we can and can't do. Yeah, so it's I think that one of the most difficult parts is ensuring that conversation is representative of the community, and therefore the network plan that you develop, rather than individual routes and opportunities, are reactive to that conversation.
I don't think I can add that much to what Chris just said, because he covered most of it. But what I will say is that I understand from some of my colleagues that the safe streets or the slow streets concept in Oakland that Chris was referencing seems to be working very well in the more affluent areas, but in the less affluent areas, they're having to go back and spend some more time talking to the communities about how they can actually successfully execute that type of a concept. So I think we as planners and policymakers, we really don't listen to the community as much as we probably should. We're having this conversation at our board meeting yesterday about investment in the bus service. And this is a conversation that's been going on since the 90s. And every year during our budget approvals, we hear the same story over and over again. And yet our policies and our funding allocations haven't really changed to reflect what we've heard from the community. And that's about to change, because we have some plans in place to bring something back to them in March. But it's been well over 20 years that this conversation has been going on. And so I think, communities that feel disenfranchised and not heard, sometimes they get worn out. And I think that is our fault. And so I think we've got to own that, and we got to get out there and talk to them and really do something meaningful for them.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. Another question that's come in is talking, how do you think about incentives, maybe amongst the private industry, for incentivizing multimodal behavior, whether that's riding bikes with and offering showers at the office or whatever that might be. What role does incentives play in this conversation?
Yeah, I think, well, as I was hinting at earlier, there's certainly an economic case to get your employees cycling, both for society, but also for a business in terms of their productivity levels. They take fewer sick days and the like. So here in the Netherlands, it's kind of a partnership between the government, which offers tax breaks to companies that can encourage its employees to commute by bicycle, whether it's offering a per kilometer reimbursement, end of trip facilities. They've even introduced a policy this year that allows them to lease an e-bike for something like €7 per month, and basically bring the bicycle travel in line with all the benefits they were offering with a company car and car travel per kilometer reimbursement, at least giving that a level ground. But I would certainly argue that maybe we should be offering more, but it's something I don't think any country does very well, to be honest.
I'm gonna answer your question, perhaps taking it in a little bit different direction, because I agree with everything Chris said, but I want to talk a little bit about disincentives. We're working on a congestion pricing pilot here in Los Angeles, and looking to try to manage demand on our transportation system by single occupant users. And so I think that there's a role to be played in, providing the incentives and the disincentives when you have limited capacity. And that's why I spoke earlier about our commodity being space, because I think it's really important for people to understand that, if they're going to drive their single occupant vehicle, there's a price to be paid. And I'm not talking about at the gas pump. I'm saying, you're using space that could otherwise be used by 40 people on a bus. So I think it's really important for us to think about how we manage that demand in order to create more space for everyone.
I love that point, Nadine. So we've just got a few minutes left. I wanted to save 2 minutes. I know you both have tremendous resources at your fingertips. Do you have recommendations, just really quickly, on what people could look up after today's session to kind of help them get started, help them take that first step?
Certainly, actually, and conveniently, the Dutch Cycling Embassy has released 2 products in the last 2 weeks that people can look up on our website. The first is a book of best practices. So we have about 50 case studies broken down into 12 different categories of bicycle parking facilities, bicycle network design, bicycle lane, bicycle policy. And that's available to download for free as a PDF on our website. And we've also just launched a collection of cycling knowledge clips, which are little 5-minute explainers on a variety of topics, again, related to e-bike usage, the bike-train combination, network design, and you can also find that on our website and YouTube channel. And again, that's completely free for people to check out, dutchcycling.nl.
Well, I'll first pitch Chris's book, which we can all find probably on Amazon, I'm guessing. I want to just reference, just hopefully to give everyone some more context and inspiration, I want to reference a podcast that Metro worked on a few years ago. The podcast is called Off Peak, and I can send the link to everybody later. But it's Off Peak is a podcast. The episode number 2, it was called Roads Were Not Built for Cars, which is based partially off of a book by Carlton Reed, where he documents cycling history and the the prevalence of roads that were built for bicycles as opposed to cars, because that was pre-car. So it might be some interesting history for people to read, and maybe some inspiration to continue on your journey to add bikes back to the roads. And then the other piece is a book by Peter Norton, and I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, but I'll send it out to everyone afterwards. I actually had it previously in my presentation. I took it out, so now I don't have anything to draw from.
Fighting Traffic.
Oh, Fighting Traffic. Yes, that's right. And Peter Norton is a historian, and he talks about all the different things that were done by individuals to change the use of the streets from being for people to being for cars. And there were a lot of very deliberate things that were done in history to make that change. And so that part will just make you angry and want to go out and fight it. So I encourage everybody to look at those various resources, but I'll send those links out later.
Thanks, Nadine. I guess I'll finish the little plug for our, my own team's work at Forward, cityoftomorrow.com. Recently published a case study on how to consider racial equity in the center of mobility innovation as well. So with that, we are at the end of the Safe Street Summit sessions. Want to encourage everyone to participate in the evaluation on CVent. And then also the themed breakout sessions that are taking place immediately after this session. Those are going to be exciting and interesting as well as a nice follow-up. And to wrap things up, thank you to everyone who's taken part in the Safe Street Summit 2021. And particularly want to thank the support of Palm Beach TPA, Miami-Dade TPO, and Broward MPO as the host of this awesome summit. So again, thank you to everyone for your participation. We hope you all have a wonderful 2021 and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you again. Bye-bye.